The December Files. They say curiosity killed the cat, but no one warns you what happens when curiosity comes looking for you. It was a Tuesday morning, cold and colorless, the kind of day that feels like it's waiting for something to happen. I was sipping my third cup of coffee, scrolling through the usual mind-numbing emails, when the knock came. Not a polite knock, a deliberate heavy thud that rattled the frame. By the time I opened the door, there was no one there, just a wooden box. It wasn't large, about the size of a shoebox, but heavier than it looked. The wood was dark and smooth, almost oily to the touch, with no markings except for a yellowed postage label. No return address, no name, just my own address scrawled in uneven block letters, like a child had written it. I carried it inside, setting it on the kitchen table like it might explode. The lid wasn't nailed shut, just snug. It creaked when I lifted it, the sound oddly loud in the quiet. Inside there were Polaroid photos stacked neatly, the edges curling slightly with age. The first photo was innocuous enough, a plain room with a sagging couch. The angle was strange, though, like someone had taken it while crouched in a corner. The next photo was similar, another room, empty, except for an overturned chair. Again, the angle was off, low, watching. It wasn't until I was halfway through the stack that the unease started creeping in. One photo showed a close-up of a clock on a wall, its hands frozen at 3:17. Another captured a cracked window pane with frost blooming across the glass. And then I saw it. The last photo wasn't like the others. It was taken at night, a blurry, grainy shot of my apartment building. My stomach dropped when I realized the camera had been pointed at my bedroom window. I shoved the photos back into the box and slammed the lid shut, my pulse hammering. For a moment I just stared at the box, my brain spinning with questions. Who sent it? Why? How long had someone been watching me? I didn't know it yet, but that box wasn't a gift. It was a door, and I had just opened it. I couldn't sleep that night. The box sat on the kitchen counter, taunting me in the dim light from the street lamp outside. Every creak of the apartment felt amplified, every shadow sharper. By dawn I'd made my decision. If the box wanted my attention, it had it. Like and subscribe for more videos. Tell me where you're from in the comments. The postmark was my only clue. Elk River, Minnesota. I'd never heard of it, but a quick online search told me it was a small town about 3 hours away. Population, tiny. Reputation, non-existent. It was the kind of place that didn't make headlines unless someone went missing. By mid-morning I was on the road, the box riding shotgun. The December sky was an endless gray slab, and the highway stretched out like a thread leading to nowhere. I'd always found long drives therapeutic, but not this time. This time, every mile felt heavier, like the road itself was pulling me towards something I wasn't ready to see. The closer I got to Elk River, the thinner the traffic became. Soon, it was just me and a few rusted pickup trucks, their drivers staring straight ahead, faces blank. Even the gas stations seemed like relics from another time, faded signs, cracked asphalt, and pumps that looked like they hadn't dispensed fuel since the 1980s. When I finally rolled into Elk River, it was smaller than I'd imagined. The main street was a line of tired buildings, a hardware store, a diner, and a post office that looked like it was on its last legs. Everything felt muted, like the whole town was holding its breath. I checked onto the only motel I could find. A peeling sign above the door read, "River Rest Inn." The owner, a wiry man named Mr. Grayson, greeted me with a practiced smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Passing through?" he asked, handing me a key attached to a block of wood the size of a brick. "Something like that," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. When I mentioned the postmark and the photos, his smile faltered for the briefest second. He waved it off, saying, "Elk River doesn't see much excitement. Probably just a prank." But his eyes betrayed him. He knew something, and so did I. Whatever brought me here wasn't a prank. It was a summons. Elk River didn't feel like a town. It felt like a waiting room for something unpleasant. After checking in, I spent the rest of the day walking the streets, hoping for some kind of lead. People were friendly enough, but they had that small-town way of saying nothing with too many words. Polite deflections, careful smiles. That night, back in my motel room, I spread the Polaroids across the bed. I studied every detail, peeling wallpaper, a dented lampshade, a rusty radiator. Then I saw it, the corner of a faded sign in one of the pictures. It read, Holloway. A quick search on my phone revealed Holloway Road, a few miles out of town. The road wasn't listed on the official town map, but satellite images showed a long, lonely stretch of asphalt cutting through the woods. At the end of it, a single structure sat like a splinter in the landscape. The next morning, I drove out to Holloway Road. The forest pressed in on both sides, skeletal trees clawing at the overcast sky. The house came into view suddenly, as if it had been hiding. It looked worse than the photos. The roof sagged like it was too tired to stand, and the windows were black voids. A rusted wind chime clattered weakly against the cold breeze. I parked at the edge of the property and approached on foot, every step crunching against the frost-bitten ground. The front door was ajar, hanging limp on its hinges, as though it had been waiting for me. Inside, the air was heavy and sour, filled with the smell of mildew and something faintly metallic. Dust coated every surface, and the floor creaked under my weight. I recognized the living room immediately. Same sagging couch, same crooked lamp. But the angles were off, even now. It was like the house had been built to make you uncomfortable, every corner slightly too sharp or too round. As I moved through the house, I felt something shift. Not the air, not the light. Something deeper, like the house itself was watching. In the kitchen, I found a pile of Polaroids on the table. My hands shook as I flipped through them. They were of me, sitting in my car, walking up to the house, opening the front door. The last photo wasn't of me. It was of someone else, standing behind me. I turned. Nothing was there. I left the house in a hurry, heart pounding, hands trembling on the steering wheel as I drove back to the motel. The Polaroids I'd found were stuffed into my bag, but I couldn't bring myself to look at them again. By the time I reached the diner, the sun was beginning to set, casting long, pale shadows across the empty streets. Inside, the warm hum of conversation barely covered the faint drone of an old radio. I slid into a booth and ordered coffee, my eyes scanning the room. That's when I saw her, a young waitress balancing a tray of plates. Her name tag read Lily. She was the only one who didn't look worn down by the town's quiet decay. I flagged her down as she passed. "You're not from here, are you?" she asked, her tone cautious but curious. "Just passing through." I lied. Her eyes narrowed slightly. People don't usually pass through Elk River. I hesitated, then told her about the box, the photos, and the house. Her face paled as I spoke, her composure cracking for the first time. She sat down across from me, lowering her voice. "That house, it's been empty for years," she said. "It belonged to Evelyn Rhodes. She was strange." "Strange how?" I pressed. "She was a photographer," Lily continued, glancing around as if someone might overhear. "She'd take pictures of everything, but people said she wasn't just taking pictures, she was capturing things." "Capturing what?" Lily hesitated, her fingers curling tightly around her apron. "Things people weren't supposed to see. Shadows that didn't belong to anything. Reflections that moved when she didn't. They say she disappeared 20 years ago, but I don't think she ever really left." The words sent a shiver down my spine. "And the photos?" Her expression darkened. "You're not the first person to find them. People go into that house, find those pictures, and they don't come back the same, if they come back at all." I leaned forward, lowering my voice. "Then why hasn't anyone torn it down?" Lily shook her head. "It's not the kind of place you destroy. It's the kind you leave alone. And you should, too." But I couldn't leave. Not yet. Whatever was in that house wasn't finished with me, and I wasn't finished with it. Back at the motel, I locked the door behind me and dropped my bag on the bed. The Polaroids from the house spilled out, their glossy surfaces catching the dim light of the single overhead bulb. I told myself I was done with this, that I'd pack up and leave first thing in the morning. But even as I thought it, my hands were already reaching for the photos. I spread them out on the bed like a grim puzzle. The images were unsettling, but now they carried an unbearable weight. One showed the living room, the couch, sagging under the years of neglect. Another captured the kitchen table where I'd found the photos. But then as I flipped through them, my breath caught. In the corner of one photo, one I hadn't noticed before, was the faint outline of a figure. It wasn't clear, just a smudge of something humanoid, standing near the doorframe. My pulse quickened as I reached for another shot. This one was worse. The figure was closer now, more defined, standing near the couch. It wasn't just a blur anymore. There was a shape to it, though its features were still maddeningly vague. I told myself it was a trick of the light, a flaw in the film, but my gut told me otherwise. Then it happened. A sharp, mechanical whir broke the silence. My Polaroid camera, the one sitting untouched on the desk, spat out a fresh photo. My hands shook as I picked it up. It was of the motel room. The photo showed me sitting on the bed, surrounded by the spread-out Polaroids. But there was something wrong. In the photo, I wasn't alone. Behind me, standing by the closed bathroom door, was the figure. Its outline was sharper now, almost human, but not quite. The limbs were too long, the head tilted unnaturally to the side. I spun around, my breath catching in my throat. The bathroom door was closed, just as it had been all night. Slowly I stepped toward it, my hand trembling as I reached for the handle. The sound of another photo printing stopped me cold. I didn't look at it. Not yet. I left the room instead, the Polaroid clutched tightly in my hand, and drove. Anywhere but there. Anywhere the figure couldn't follow. But deep down, I knew it already had. I didn't stop driving until the first slivers of daylight broke through the horizon, washing the frost-covered fields in muted gold. My hands were stiff on the wheel, my mind a mess of jagged thoughts. Every shadow outside the car seemed too deliberate, every mile an eternity. But I knew where I was heading, back to the house. The Polaroid sat in the passenger seat, face down, mocking me with its silence. I hadn't dared to look at it since leaving the motel. I didn't need to. The figure was burned into my mind, its unnatural shape, the way it seemed to lean toward me. By the time I reached Holloway Road, the sun was fully up, though it brought no comfort. The house loomed in the distance, more decayed in the daylight than I remembered. I parked a good distance away, as if that might make a difference, and walked the rest. The air felt heavier here, like stepping into a room with too many unspoken arguments. Inside, the house was eerily unchanged, the same stale, metallic smell hanging in the air. My footsteps echoed on the warped floorboards as I moved through the familiar rooms. That's when I saw it. A door I hadn't noticed before. It was tucked behind a rotting bookshelf in the back of the house, partially hidden by the sagging frame. It led to the basement. The stairs creaked under my weight, each step feeling like a small betrayal of self-preservation. The air grew colder as I descended, the light from above quickly swallowed by the thick, oppressive dark. My phone flashlight barely cut through the shadows, but it was enough to reveal the walls. They were covered in photos, hundreds of them. Each Polaroid was pinned to the damp wood, their edges curling from years of neglect. Faces stared back at me, some frightened, some vacant, and others distorted. Their features twisted, their eyes stretched too wide, their mouths frozen mid-scream. In the center of the room was a table. On it sat an ancient camera, its lens cracked but intact, alongside a stack of undeveloped film. I stepped closer, the sound of my breathing deafening in the silence. That's when I felt it, the faintest warmth radiating from the walls, like something alive. And then, from the shadows, I heard the unmistakable click of a camera shutter. The Polaroid in my pocket grew hot. The click echoed through the basement, sharp and deliberate, as if the room itself had taken the photo. My flashlight trembled in my hand as I whipped around, but the shadows remained still, mocking me with their emptiness. I pulled the Polaroid from my pocket. It was warm to the touch, almost uncomfortably so. I flipped it over and froze. It wasn't the picture from the motel. It was something new. It showed me, standing exactly where I was now, staring at the table in the basement. But behind me, just barely visible in the darkened corner, was a face. Pale, hollow-eyed, and too close. I couldn't move. My body screamed for me to run, but my legs locked in place. Slowly I forced myself to turn, my flashlight cutting through the dim. The corner was empty, but the warmth in the walls was stronger now, pulsing faintly, like the beat of a hidden heart. The stack of undeveloped film on the table called to me, though every rational part of me begged to leave it alone. I reached for the top reel, my hands shaking as I fed it into the projector. The machine was old, rusted, but it hummed to life as if it had been waiting for this moment. The film flickered onto the wall, its images grainy and disjointed. It was a series of self-portraits, taken by Evelyn Rhodes. The first few frames showed her in the house, standing in front of a mirror, adjusting her camera. But as the reel progressed, her reflection began to change. Her face stretched unnaturally, her features distorting in impossible ways. Her eyes grew wider, darker, until they were empty sockets. Her mouth twisted into a gaping void, and then, in the final frames, she wasn't in the mirror anymore. She was standing behind the camera, staring directly into the lens, into me. The film sputtered to an end, leaving the room in silence. That's when I felt it, a presence, heavy and suffocating, right behind me. I didn't need to turn to know it was there, but I did. What I saw wasn't Evelyn, not anymore. Her body was human, but wrong. Her limbs bent in ways they shouldn't, her head tilting too far to one side, and her face, it was mine. The camera on the table clicked. A new Polaroid slid out. This time I didn't look. I didn't run. I couldn't. It felt like the air had thickened, trapping me in place as Evelyn, or whatever she had become, stood there, wearing my face. Her eyes were bottomless, her movements too fluid, as if her joints had forgotten how to be human. The camera clicked again. Another Polaroid slid out onto the table. Why me? I managed to choke out, my voice barely a whisper. It felt absurd to speak, but the silence was unbearable. Her head tilted further, almost upside down now, her expression eerily calm. She reached for the Polaroid, her elongated fingers curling around the edge of the photograph. Slowly, deliberately, she held it up for me to see. It was of the house, but not just any part of the house. This basement, right now. It showed me standing there, staring at her. Except, in the photo I wasn't holding a flashlight. I was holding the camera. I stumbled back, the beam of my flashlight flickering as it hit the far wall. The photos pinned there, those twisted, screaming faces, were moving. subtly at first, then more violently, their mouths straining open, their eyes darting around in silent terror. The warmth in the walls turned to searing heat. The room felt alive, its pulse matching the erratic rhythm of my heart. "I didn't ask for this," I said, my voice cracking. "Take it back. Whatever you're doing, take it back." Evelyn, or the thing pretending to be her, stepped closer. She placed the Polaroid on the table, next to the still smoking one that had just developed. Then she spoke, her voice layered, echoing as if a dozen versions of her were speaking at once. "It's never been about asking." She reached out, her impossibly long fingers brushing against my chest. My vision swam, the room bending and warping around me. I felt something pull, deep inside, like a thread being yanked free. And then I wasn't in the basement anymore. I was in one of the Polaroids, trapped, silent, watching. The last thing I saw before the darkness swallowed me was Evelyn, now wearing my body, picking up the camera and pointing it at the stairs. The sound of footsteps echoed above. Someone else was coming, and the camera was ready. Like and subscribe for more videos. Tell me where you're from in the comments.